Alright, Broly and Invincible, episode 5. In this episode, Eve trains Broly, so let's get to it. Adam Eve hovered above Monster Island, the refractive cloak shimmering around its borders like a heat haze. Below the island was a brutal tapestry of primal chaos. The sheer scale of it was staggering. A continent-sized sprawl of jagged obsidian mountains, jungle so dense and vibrantly green they seemed to swallow the light itself, and plains of colossal bleached bones that served as grim monuments to the ecosystem's brutality. The air itself was a physical presence, thick with humidity and the cacophony of million primal life forms, deep guttural bellows that vibrated in her chest, piercing the shrieks from creatures she couldn't see, and the constant, unsettling rustle of a billion oversized leaves. Where do you even begin to look for one person in this? She thought, her heart sinking. This wasn't a hiding place. It was a whole world outside of the normal. Mark's stories of kaiju and radioactive rivers hadn't fully captured the oppressive, living hostility of this place. From up here, she could see the titanic shapes moving in the jungles, their shadows darkening entire swaths of land. A flock of pterosaurs with crystalline-looking wings the size of fighter jets circled a distant, steaming volcano. Her gaze swept across the landscape, searching for any sign of human habitation. A crater, a shelter, a wisp of smoke, but there was nothing. It was pristine, untamed wilderness. The only paths were those carved by the passage of behemoths. She felt a profound sense of intrusion, as if the island itself was aware of her, a sterile, polished anomaly in its messy, violent perfection. Her plan, which had seemed so logical in the city, now felt impossibly naive. Finding Broly here would be less like finding a needle in a haystack and more like finding a specific grain of sand on a beach that was actively trying to kill you. Taking a steadying breath, she began a slow, cautious descent toward the tree line. Her senses on high alert, ready to phase at the first sign of a threat. She had to find him. There was no other choice. She was committed. The air shifted the moment Eve descended past the shimmering cloak. The humid roaring chaos of the island became a physical wall of sounds and smells. She landed softly on a beach of jet black sand that hissed with a residual-like heat. The jungle loomed before her like a fortress wall of waxy deep green leaves and twisted gnarled trunks. She took a tentative step forward toward the tree line, her boots sinking into the sand. Okay, Eve, think. He grew up here. He knows this place. So just look for a path, a sign, anything that isn't completely primal. Her hand brushed aside a curtain of dripping vine-like leaves, each one as broad as her torso. And that was her first mistake. The rustle was instantaneous. A section of the cliff face to her right, which she had mistaken for a moss-covered rock formation, moved. Stone gray scales shifted and a head the size of a compact car lifted on a serpentine neck. It wasn't a wyvern from a fantasy, but something far more alien and vicious, a creature with obsidian eyes that fixed on her with unnerving synchrony. Its beak, a cruel hook of chitinous material, opened to reveal a spiring needle-lined throat, and let out a chittering shriek that felt like an ice pick to her ears. Eve barely had time to gasp. The creature launched itself from the cliff, not with wings, but with powerful piston-like legs, its body unfolding to reveal webbed fin-like appendages that stabilized its glide. It was on her in a heartbeat. "Back off!" she yelled, more from shock than expectation. It would understand. Her hands flew up, and a dome of hard pink light erupted around her just as the creature slammed into it. The impact was tremendous. The shield held, but the force sent her skidding backward, her boots carving deep furrows in the black sand. The creature recoiled, shrieking in frustration, but immediately coiled for another strike. It was unnervingly fast, a predator that was clearly built for ambush. It came again, this time hammering its beak against the shield in a rapid percussive barrage. Crack, crack, crack. Pink light spiderweb under the assault. Eve grunted, feeling the feedback of each blow jolt up her arm. She was being pushed back toward the surf, the ocean waves crashing around her ankles. It's not giving up. This is its territory. I'm just prey to it. Fine. If it wanted to fight, she was going to give it one. As the creature drew back for another charging stab, Eve dropped the shield. Its beak shot forward, aiming for her now unprotected torso, and within that split second, she didn't dodge. She created two massive rectangular walls of solid pink energy. They materialized on either side of the creature's head, like the pages of an enormous book slamming shut. The smack of the constructs colliding was a sickeningly final. The creature's piercing sheet was cut off instantly. For a moment, it hung suspended in the air, with its head crushed between the two glowing planes. Then the energy walls dissipated into fading motes of light, and the massive, lifeless body dropped to the sand with a heavy, wet thud. Eve stood panting, the adrenaline making her hands tremble. The black sand around the corpse was already darkening with seeping violet blood. The whole encounter had lasted less than 30 seconds. She looked from the dead beast to the impenetrable roaring jungle. A cold understanding settled within her stomach. This wasn't just a mission of persuasion anymore. It seemed like a test of survival. And Broly hadn't just survived in this place. He had called it home. The sheer terrifying scale of what that meant was finally horribly clear to what she was about to be dealing with. The chittering shriek of the fallen beast did not fade into silence. Instead, it was answered, a deep, rumbling growl echoed from the jungle's depths, followed by the snapping of trees as something massive shifted its weight. From the canopy above, a chorus of hoots and screeches erupted, and the shadows between the colossal trunks began to writhe with movement. Eve spun, her hands rising again, pink energy flickering around her fingertips as she prepared to be swarmed by creatures. The island had taken her first blow as a declaration of war, she thought. She braced for the onslaught, expecting a tide of claws and teeth, but it never came. As suddenly as it had begun, the cacophony of died, the aggressive hoots from above cut off mid-screech, the rustling in the shadows stilled. The deep growl tapered into a low, wary rumble and then fell silent. An oppressive, unnatural hush fell over the coastline, broken only by the relentless crash of waves. The very air seemed to grow thick and heavy, the humidity pressing down on her like a weight. Every creature, great and small, had frozen in place, their attention locked onto a single point within the dense tree line. Eve followed their gaze, her heart hammering against her ribs. Something was coming, something that commanded the attention of every monster on this godforsaken island at this location. The wall of waxy leaves and thick vines parted, not with a violent crash of a charging beast, but with a deliberate, effortless push, and he stepped out. It was Broly, but somehow more and less than the boy she'd seen on the rooftop. He was barefoot, dressed in simple rough-spun hides fashioned from green pelts. His hair was wild and untamed mane, and his frame seemed even more densely packed with muscle, as if the island itself had been reforging him. In his hand he held the haunch of some unrecognizable creature, still dripping with fresh blood. His eyes, however, were the same, hollowed by trauma, but now also sharp with a feral awareness. He looked at the dead beast, then at the violet blood staining the sand, and finally at her. His expression was unreadable, a mask of quiet intensity. He didn't look surprised, he looked resigned. "Eve," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to belong to the jungle itself. "You shouldn't be here." For a long moment, Eve couldn't find her words. Her gaze was trapped not by his eyes, but by the map of violence etched across his body. The rough hides left his arms and torso mostly bare, revealing a tapestry of scars that told 1,000 silent stories of his childhood on this island. Long pale lines from claws raked across his ribs. A starburst of puckered tissue on his shoulder spoke of a puncture wound from something with a barbed tail. A recent barely healed gash ran from his collarbone down to his pectoral muscle, stark and red against his skin. This wasn't the clean, powered combat of a superhero. This was the brutal, visceral survival of a gladiator that was in an endless war of creatures that were hostile. He stood there, allowing her to look, the silence stretching between them as the jungle held its breath with him. Finally, Eve swallowed, forcing her eyes back to his. "Look, Broly," she began, her voice softer than she intended. "I know we don't know each other very well, but I think you should come back with me. Mark, he's falling apart. He needs you around. He's really worried about you." Broly's gaze didn't waver. He dropped the meat haunch onto the sand, a dismissive gesture that seemed to discard her entire plea. When he spoke, His voice was calm and devoid of the rage he described, but filled with a terrible, unshakable certainty. Mark worries about the friend that he knows, Broly said, his eyes flickering for a moment to the dead creature beside them. He doesn't understand the monster that friend can become. He took a step closer, not threateningly, but to emphasize his point. On that flaxen world, I didn't see soldiers. I didn't see an invasion. I just saw noise, and I erased it. All of the army. He tapped a fist against his own chest, the gesture heavy with self-loathing. The part of me that knows, Mark, that knows your world, it goes to sleep, and something else wakes up. Something that would not care about the difference between an enemy and a skyscraper full of people. He finally gestured around them at the deadly but contained chaos of the island. Here, if that thing wakes up, I might level a mountain. In the States, I would level a city. My place is here, where my rage can only hurt other monsters. Broly gave a final shake of his head, a gesture of absolute finality. The conversation was over. He turned his back on her, his broad shoulders blocking out the light, and he began to walk toward the waiting darkness of the jungle. The creature, still silent, began to stir again, as if receiving a silent command that the disturbance was leaving. Eve felt a surge of desperate panic. He was about to vanish, and she would have failed her mission. Wait! He didn't stop. What if I could help you? The words burst from her louder than she intended. That halted him. His steps faltered, and he paused at the very edge of the tree line, though he didn't turn around. Eve pressed her advantage, her voice firming with conviction. What if I can help you control it? Now, he slowly turned, a single skeptical eyebrow raised. The hollow wariness in his eyes was joined by a flicker of something else. Not hope, but a profound, deep-seated curiosity. No one had ever offered that before. Beats had taught him to fight, to suppress, to leash the beast, never to understand it. Eve took his hesitation as an invitation and stepped forward, closing the distance between them on the black sand. Look, I get it. Our powers aren't the same. You're a volcano, and I'm a sculptor. She held up her hand. A complex lattice-like structure of pink energy bloomed within her palm, shifting from a solid cube to a swirling orb to a delicate spinning bird-like sculpture before dissolving into motes of light. But at the end of the day, it's all energy. It's all a mental thing. Focus, visualization, channeling, output, instead of just unleashing it. I've spent my whole life learning to control every single atom that I can manipulate. I don't just make walls, I make almost anything. That's not power. That's not through just power, that's control. And I think I can help you learn it. Broly was silent for a long moment, his gaze shifting from her face to the spot where her energy construct had been. The jungle sounds seemed to recede again, as if the island itself was listening to the conversation. He was weighing the offer, measuring the tiny, fragile possibility against a lifetime of catastrophic failure. Finally, he spoke, his voice a low rumble that carried over the waves. You can try. The words were heavy, laden with the weight of his own doubt. But the training sessions happen here, on Monster Island. He gestured to the savage landscape that was around them. This is my cage. I am not opening the door, not for you, and not for anyone. It wasn't a welcome, it was a condition, a test, and the first lesson would be surviving the classroom. The air on Monster Island was thick and heavy, tasting of salt, sulfur, and something else. Something primal and metallic. Here, near the shore, the cacophony of roars and shrieks was a constant, oppressive soundtrack. Adam Eve stood firm, her red hair a stark contrast to the deep greens and volcanic blacks of the landscape. Before her, Broly knelt in the black sand, his face a mask of intense concentration, muscles coiled tight with the effort of restraint. It's not about letting it out, Eve instructed, her voice calm but firm, cutting through the din. It's about directing it. Your power is like a river. You've been breaking the dam every time. I want you to build an aqueduct. Guide it. Start by feeling it in your core. That heat, that pressure, then push it, invite it, Draw it down your arms through your veins and ask it to gather in your hands. Broly's eyes were squeezed shut, his brow furrowed. A flicker of green, wild and untamed, sparkled around his torso like emerald lighting. The sand at his knees began to tremble, vibrating into small mounds. A low growl rumbled within his chest, the sound of pure frustration. It fights me, he gritted out. It wants to explode. I know. Pause. Eve said, taking a cautious step closer. That's its nature. You have to show it a new one. Don't command it like a soldier. Guide it like you guide water. Picture it not as a weapon, but as a tool, something you're using to build. He took a shuddering breath, the chaotic green aura receding from his body, pulling inward. The tremors in the sand stilled. His massive scarred hands, usually weapons that could shatter a continent, lay open and upturned on his knees. Eve watched mesmerized as the energy began to obey. It was no longer a green wildfire. It became a slow, deliberate current, flowing down the powerful cords of his arms. Tiny, luminescent particles of green light, like captive stars, swirled into existence above his palms. They were hesitant at first, flickering in and out, but as Broly's breathing evened out, they grew in number and stability, orbiting a central empty point. Now, Eve whispered, as if a loud noise would shatter the delicate process. Give it a shape, a simple one, a container, a sphere. Broly's eyelids fluttered open, his pupils reflecting the dancing green motes. He stared at the space between his hands, his focus absolute. The particles stopped their chaotic dance and began to flow in a unified, clockwise direction, faster and faster, forming a brilliant, humming halo. In its center, light condensed, pulling in from the edges of the halo to form a solid, perfect core. With a final soft hum, the halo itself collapsed inward, and there it was, a single, perfectly formed orb of vibrant emerald energy, no larger than a baseball, hovering serenely above his palm. It didn't rage or scream. It pulsed with a quiet, somewhat controlled luminescence, casting a soft green light on his awestruck face. He stared at it not as a thing of destruction, but as a thing he had for the first time truly and peacefully created. The celebration, however, was short-lived, a single shared breath of triumph that died within their throats. The emerald orb of a marvel of controlled creation did not fade. It continued to pulse within Broly's palm, its serene hum now taking on a sinister, impatient-like edge. The quiet control he had exerted began to crack under the other orb's persistent building up pressure. Broly's awe morphed into alarm. His hands trembled, not from effort but from strain. The orb was stable, but it was not dissipating. It was a closed system of immense power with no exit strategy. The gentle glow intensified, the light becoming harsh, the hum deepening into a threatening whine. Veins bulged on his forearm as he fought to simply contain it. Eve, he grunted, his voice tight with a new kind of panic. I don't know how to put it out. It won't go away. Eve's eyes widened, her instructor's calm shattering. She saw the raw energy beginning to sear the skin around his palm, tiny wisps of smoke rising. He had built the aqueduct but forgotten to design the spillway. The power was backing up, and the dam was about to break in the most literal sense. Don't let it go here, she shouted, her mind racing. You have to direct it. Throw it. Aim for something empty. Understanding flashed in Broly's pained eyes with a guttural shout. That was part frustration and part desperation. He cocked his arm back and hurled the orb, not with a pitcher's grace, but with a frantic heave of a man discarding a live grenade. The perfect sphere of energy streaked across the coastline, a comet of contained devastation. It didn't fly in an arc. It traveled in a perfectly straight, horrifically fast line, like a laser-guided testament to his raw power. It struck a small coastal mountain a mile away. There was no explosion in the traditional sense. No fireball, no slow-motion collapse. The entire peak, a solid mass of rock and jungle, hundreds of feet tall, simply ceased to exist. One moment it was a feature of the landscape. The next it was an expanding cloud of superheated dust and vaporized stone. A silent, expanding sphere of annihilation bloomed where the summit had been, followed a heartbeat later by a thunderclap of displaced air that hit them like a physical wall. Eve barely had time to throw up a massive curved barrier of pink energy. The shockwave slammed into it, not with the force of wind, but of solid matter. Screeching as it parted around the shield, a torrent of shattered rock and debris, heated to the point of glass, rained down around them, pinging and shattering against her construct. When the hail subsided and the dust began to settle, Eve lowered her barrier, her ears ringing. Where the mountain had stood, there was now a flat, glowing mesa, its surface slick with molten rock. The silence that returned was deeper, more profound, as if the island itself was in shock. Broly stood panting, staring at his empty smoking hand, then at the horrifying result of his control, quote-unquote. This lesson was a catastrophic success that quickly turned failure. He had shaped his power, but he had no concept of scale. He had turned a continent-shattering rage into a precision tool, and then within doing so, he had demonstrated just how terrifying a controlled bomb explosion could be. Broly stared at his own hand, as if it were a parasitic creature grafted onto his wrist. It trembled slightly, not from fatigue, but from a deep, revulsive horror. The same hand that had moments ago cradled a perfect sphere of light had just effortlessly erased an entire mountain. The evidence was still settling in the air, the acrid smell of ozone and vaporized rock, a permanent stain on the moment. This wasn't a chaotic inferno of the Flaxen world. This was something worse. It was calculated. He had willed that power into a specific concentrated form, and the result was a more efficient, more terrifying kind of annihilation. The control Eve offered wasn't a leash for the monster. It was just sharpening its claws. The ringing in Eve's ears began to subside, replaced by the frantic thumping of her own heart. Her mind reeled, struggling to catalog the event. The sheer casual power on display was beyond any scale she had ever witnessed. It wasn't just strong, it was absolute. For a full moment, she could only stare at the flattened, glowing horizon, the geological scar that now marked the island's profile. She had come here to teach control, and her first lesson had resulted in a topographic alteration. She forced herself to turn away from the devastation and look at Broly. The despair on his face was a tangible force. He saw this as a total failure, a confirmation of his own irredeemable nature. She couldn't let that narrative solidify within him. Broly, she said, her voice intentionally steady, cutting through his silent self-flagellation. He flinched, expecting condemnation. Look at me. When his eyes, dark with shame, finally met hers, she continued. What just happened was a lot, but you're focusing on the wrong part of that. She pointed at the vanished mountain. That is a problem of a scale we can work on. But this, she gestured firmly to his hand, is the progress. An hour ago, that energy would have erupted from your entire body and laid waste to this entire coastline. But you managed to channel it. You contained it. You gave it a shape. That's the first step, and probably the hardest step. She took a breath, making her tone practical, almost clinical, to ground them both. Now we know the next lesson. We need to learn how to retract it, how to unravel the form you create and pull the energy back inside. It's just another technique that we can figure out. Glancing at the darkening sky, she sighed. I have to go. School tomorrow. It was a ludicrously mundane statement, a reminder of a world that felt a million miles away. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her, low and rough. Thank you. The words hung in the sulphurous air, simply and utterly expected. Eve paused, looking back at him. The feral warrior king of Monster Island was gone, replaced once more by the traumatized boy from the rooftop. He wasn't thanking her for the power lesson. He was thanking her for not running away after the results of today, for not looking at him like he was a monster after what she had just witnessed, for seeing the progress where he only saw the destruction. It was a gratitude born from a profound loneliness, and it struck her more deeply than any shockwave ever could. She simply nodded, a silent promise in her eyes, before lifting into the air and leaving him alone with his thoughts and the smoldering proof of his fragile breakthrough. 3 weeks since Eve's first cataclysmic lesson had carved a new rhythm into the brutal landscape of Monster Island. The primordial chaos became a training ground, its relentless dangers a brutal practical testing range. Now, when Broly knelt in the black sand, the process was less a battle and more a tense negotiation. The green energy still coalesced above his palm, but the frantic wild sparks were gone. Instead, it flowed with a deliberate, if strained rhythm. His brow was furrowed, not in pain, but in intense focus, like a safe cracker listening for a click. Good. Eve's voice was a calm anchor. Now feel the output. Don't just shape it. Quantify it. You're not opening a floodgate. You're turning a valve. A quarter turn. Just a trickle. Broly's eyes were locked on the swirling orb with a slow, controlled exhalation. He made a minute adjustment. The orb, which once pulsed with the promise of a continental destruction, dimmed noticeably. Its fierce hum softened to a whisper, and with a flick of his wrist, he sent it streaking toward a gnarled ancient tree that stood alone on a rocky outcrop. There was no deafening thunderclap this time, no expanding spear of annihilation. There was only a sharp crack of splitting air, a brief intense flash of green light, and the tree was simply gone. Not shattered into splinters, but vaporized into a shower of incandescent sawdust that drifted away on the salty breeze. Where it had stood, the rock beneath was slightly scorched, but still intact. It was, by the same measure, a staggering display of power, but compared to the vaporized mountain, it was a masterpiece of precision. From the sidelines, Mark let out a low whistle. A half-eaten protein bar forgotten in his hand. Whoa, okay. That's a way better party trick than the mountain thing. Broly didn't smile, but the tension in his shoulders eased a fraction. He looked from the scorched spot to his hand, then to Eve, seeking validation beyond Mark's stunned praise. It's control, Eve affirmed, a genuine smile touching her lips. For the first time in this grueling process, you're learning to dial the power down, not just aim it. You're building the aqueduct and you control the valves. The progress was fragile, hard-won, and terrifying in its own right. The ability to precisely vaporize a target was, after all, still a weapon. But it was progress. For the first time, the immense power he wielded felt less like a random cataclysm and more like a tool, one whose terrifying weight he was finally learning to heft with intention instead of blind fury. The light was different here. At the edge of Monster Island, the oppressive canopy choked gloom gave way to the open sky, and the air carried the clean salt of the ocean instead of the metallic tang of primal blood. For a month, this had been the designated meeting point, the neutral ground between Broly's exile and the rest of the known world. Today, however, Broly stood not as a prisoner awaiting visitors, but as a man preparing to cross a threshold. He looked from Mark's eager face to Eve's calm, analytic gaze, his own expression unreadable before the faintest softening around his eyes. I think, he began, his voice a low rumble that carried newfound steadiness. I can leave now. For a while, I mean. He quickly held up a hand, a preemptive gesture. I will not test the new control of on the mainland, not near people. The risk is still too great. But I believe I can be there without being a danger by just being there. The reaction was split perfectly between them. Eve's lips curved into a soft, triumphant smile. It wasn't the giddy joy of a mission accomplished, but the deep satisfaction of an engineer watching a complex machine finally hum to life. She saw the monumental shift in his mindset, from fearing his very presence to managing his own power. Mark, however, exploded with an unfiltered excitement. Hell yeah, man, he cheered, lunging forward to tap a fist against Broly's shoulder, a gesture of camaraderie that once would have made the sand flinch. This is awesome. I wish you'd told me sooner. I could have had a welcome home party ready. Mom's going to be so happy she's probably going to cook enough for a week. Broly didn't reply with words. Instead, a small, genuine smile touched his own lips. It was a fragile thing, weathered by trauma and hard-won discipline, but it was real. And that simple expression was the quiet hope that he could, perhaps, reclaim a piece of the home that he had been so afraid of destroying. The island's relentless chorus of roars seemed to fade behind him, no longer in a cage, but simply a place he was leaving behind for now. So yeah, man, on this episode, that'll be in this episode. So Broly's learning to control his powers slowly and gradually, right? And he's also making a new friend. And I'll catch you guys on the next one. Let me know what y'all think. Comment down below. Like, share, subscribe, all that. Super chats, open. Peace.